A weathered farmer stands at attention in a high-security military briefing room, his calloused hands clutching a battered flight recorder as generals and intelligence officers lean forward in disbelief. Just 96 hours earlier, he had been tending his failing crops when he discovered an injured pilot crawling from a smoking aircraft hidden in his north pasture. Now surrounded by the nation's highest military command, he must decide whether to surrender the evidence that could prevent an international crisis or protect the mysterious pilot who begged for his silence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Ethan Miller wiped sweat from his sun-weathered face as he surveyed the parched fields surrounding his farmhouse. The relentless July drought had turned what should have been thriving wheat into brittle yellow stalks, barely worth harvesting. At 58, the deep furrows in Ethan's face told the story of decades battling unpredictable weather, volatile markets, and increasingly impossible odds in America's forgotten heartland. The 240-acre farm in Clearwater County had been in the Miller family for 3 generations. Ethan's grandfather had purchased the land after returning from World War II, transforming rocky soil into productive fields through sheer determination and ingenuity. Now, after 40 years of Ethan's own stewardship, Cedar Ridge Farm faced foreclosure, a fact confirmed by the bank notice that had arrived in that morning's mail. 90 days, Ethan muttered, folding the letter and tucking it into the pocket of his faded workshirt. 3 months to somehow find $210,000, an impossible sum for a farm that had operated at a loss for the past 3 seasons. He squinted at the distant tree line, where his property bordered the vast Hadley National Forest, government land that stretched for hundreds of miles along the state's northern border. The isolation that had once seemed a blessing. No neighbors complaining about early morning tractor noise or the smell of fertilizer, now felt like abandonment. The nearest town, Riverton, was 30 miles away, and its population had dwindled as family farms failed and younger generations sought opportunities elsewhere. Even the Regional Agricultural Extension Office had closed 2 years ago, another victim of budget cuts that prioritized urban concerns over rural needs. Ethan's gaze shifted to the barn, where his ancient combine sat partially disassembled. He'd been attempting to repair it himself, unable to afford the service fees charged by the nearest equipment dealer. Parts for the 15-year-old machine were increasingly difficult to find, another pressure pushing farmers toward newer, more expensive models that required loans most couldn't secure. Inside the weathered equipment shed, photographs taped to the wall chronicled happier times. Ethan and his late wife Margaret standing proudly before their first bumper crop. Their daughter Caroline graduating from agricultural college. The community harvest festival where Cedar Ridge Farm had once won awards for grain quality. Margaret had been gone for 7 years now, cancer taking her quickly, despite their desperate journey through experimental treatments that had depleted their savings and begun the spiral into debt. Caroline had reluctantly left the farm 5 years ago, her agricultural degree leading her to a research position with an international development organization. Currently stationed in East Africa, she called when satellite phones were available, her voice carrying both homesickness and the certainty that she couldn't have saved the farm even if she'd stayed. Ethan never mentioned the foreclosure notice. During their brief conversations, unwilling to burden her with problems she couldn't solve from half a world away, he picked up a wrench and returned to the combine's exposed engine. The fuel injection system needed cleaning, and the grain separator had a bearing that screamed like a banshee when operating. His truck needed attention too. The brakes were dangerously soft, and the power steering groaned ominously, but the harvest equipment took priority. Without it, there would be no point attempting to bring in even the meager crop that had survived the drought. Ethan worked methodically through the afternoon, his mind churning with calculations and contingencies. At best, the wheat would bring in $42,000, less than a quarter of what he needed to satisfy the bank. He could sell some equipment, but at auction, the depreciated machinery would fetch pennies on the dollar. The land itself was his only significant asset, and even that had decreased in value as rural populations declined and factory farms consolidated agricultural production. As the sun began to set, Ethan wiped his hands on a shop rag and surveyed his progress. The combine wasn't fixed, but it was closer. Tomorrow he would drive to Riverton for the parts he couldn't fabricate himself, another expense on his precariously balanced accounts. He switched off the workshop lights and stepped outside, pausing to appreciate the spectacular sunset painting the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. This land had a beauty that transcended economic value, a truth increasingly forgotten in an era that measured worth solely in dollars and cents. His grandfather had understood this, teaching Ethan to see farming not just as a business, but as stewardship of something precious and enduring. "We're just borrowing this land from future generations," he would say, a philosophy that had guided Ethan's resistance to chemical-intensive farming methods, even when they promised higher short-term yields. The distant rumble of thunder interrupted his reflections. Ethan glanced toward the northern horizon, where dark clouds were gathering. The Weather Service had mentioned a possibility of storms, a rare hope in the drought-stricken region. Even a few inches of rain might salvage portions of his crop, though it had likely come too late for substantial improvement. He was heading toward the house when an unusual sound caught his attention. At first, he thought it was just the approaching storm, but the noise was too mechanical, too rhythmic, the unmistakable pulsing of aircraft engines, but strange somehow, not the familiar drone of commercial flights that occasionally passed high overhead. Ethan scanned the darkening sky, puzzled. Cedar Ridge Farm sat nearly 100 miles from the nearest commercial airport, and while military aircraft sometimes traversed the region, they typically flew at altitudes that rendered them nearly invisible. This sound was closer, more immediate, and accompanied by a high-pitched whine he'd never heard before. The noise intensified suddenly, followed by a sharp crack that echoed across the fields. Ethan spotted it then, a dark shape descending rapidly toward the northern section of his property, trailing what looked like smoke. The aircraft was moving erratically, clearly in distress. As he watched in disbelief, it disappeared below his line of sight, beyond the ridge that separated his wheat fields from the pasture that bordered the national forest. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A dull thud reached him seconds later, then silence. Ethan stood frozen momentarily, processing what he'd witnessed. A plane, or something similar, had just crashed on his property. Without conscious decision, he was moving, sprinting toward his truck, adrenaline overriding the usual caution of his aging knees and back. If someone was aboard that aircraft, they might need immediate help. The truck's engine groaned in protest as he turned the key, but it caught on the third attempt. Ethan navigated the rutted farm road at dangerous speed, bouncing violently as He crested the ridge. In the fading light, he could see a dark furrow cut through his fallow north pasture, leading to a crumpled mass of metal partially obscured by the tree line. As he approached, the distinctive shape became clearer, and Ethan felt a chill despite the summer evening's warmth. This was no ordinary aircraft. Its sleek, angular design was unlike any commercial or private plane he'd ever seen. The absence of clear wings and the unusual material, a matte black surface that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light, marked it as something extraordinary, almost certainly military and possibly experimental. Ethan parked his truck at a cautious distance and approached on foot, alert for any signs of fire or fuel leakage. The craft had crumpled upon impact, but remarkably remained largely intact. No markings were visible on its surface, no numbers, no insignia, nothing to identify its origin or purpose. "Hello?" he called out, circling the wreckage. "Anybody there? Can you hear me?" A faint sound answered him, not from the craft itself, but from the tree line several yards away. Ethan redirected, his eyes straining in the growing darkness. There, propped against a pine tree, was a figure in what appeared to be a flight suit, helmet still in place. The pilot raised a gloved hand weakly as Ethan approached, then fumbled with the helmet's fastening. Ethan knelt beside the injured aviator, helping to remove the complex headgear. The face revealed was younger than Ethan expected, a woman perhaps in her mid-30s, with close-cropped dark hair and sharp features currently contorted in pain. Blood trickled from a cut above her left eyebrow, and she held her right arm at an unnatural angle. "Thank you," she managed, her voice strained. "Wasn't sure anyone would find me out here." "You're on Cedar Ridge Farm," Ethan explained, already assessing her injuries. "I'm Ethan Miller, the owner. We need to get you to a hospital." The pilot's eyes widened with alarm. "No hospitals," she said firmly, then winced as she tried to straighten. "No authorities. Not yet." Ethan frowned, conflicted. The woman was clearly injured, possibly seriously, but her insistence raised immediate questions about the nature of her flight and the strange aircraft. "You're hurt. You need medical attention." "I have training," she replied. "Nothing's life-threatening. Dislocated shoulder, probable concussion, maybe some cracked ribs." She glanced back toward the wreckage, her expression tightening. "But I need to secure something from the aircraft before anyone else arrives." "Who would be arriving?" Ethan asked, the situation growing more puzzling by the minute. "We're pretty isolated out here." "Others will have tracked the craft's descent," she said cryptically. "I need your help, Mr. Miller. What I was transporting is classified. Lives depend on securing it properly." Thunder rumbled closer, and the first heavy raindrops began to fall, spattering against the strange aircraft's surface with a hissing sound that seemed oddly out of place. Ethan made his decision. Whatever was happening here was beyond his experience, but he couldn't leave an injured person exposed to the elements during what was rapidly developing into a severe storm. And if the woman's concerns about others tracking the aircraft were valid, they were both potentially in danger remaining at the crash site. "Let's get you to shelter first," he said, helping her to her feet. "Then we'll figure out the rest." The pilot nodded gratefully, though her eyes remained fixed on the downed aircraft. "There's a locked case in the cockpit, black with a digital keypad. I need it before we go." The rain was intensifying, driven by gusting winds that bent the nearby pines. Against his better judgment, Ethan helped the pilot to his truck, then approached the alien-looking craft. The cockpit access was not immediately obvious, but the pilot directed him through the process of locating and opening a nearly invisible hatch. The interior was cramped and filled with technology, unlike anything Ethan had seen before, certainly far beyond the basic GPS and radio equipment in the crop dusters and small aircraft he was familiar with. Following her instructions, he located the case secured beside what appeared to be the pilot's seat. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, approximately the dimensions of a large laptop, but considerably weightier. By the time Ethan returned to the truck with the case, both he and the pilot were soaked. The storm had arrived in full force, sheets of rain reducing visibility to mere yards. Lightning illuminated the downed aircraft in stark flashes, making it appear even more otherworldly. "Thank you," the pilot said earnestly, as Ethan placed the case on her lap before starting the truck. "I know this puts you in a difficult position." "You can explain once we're somewhere dry," Ethan replied, navigating carefully back toward the farmhouse. The truck's headlights reflected off the torrential rain, making the familiar road treacherous and strange. As they crested the ridge, Ethan glanced in his rearview mirror. For a moment, he thought he saw distant lights moving along the forest edge near the crash site. But another crack of thunder drew his attention forward, and when he looked again, there was nothing visible through the storm's intensity. The farmhouse lights were a welcome sight as Ethan pulled up as close to the porch as possible. He helped the pilot inside, conscious of her wincing with each movement. The case remained clutched tightly in her uninjured arm, apparently too valuable to release even momentarily. Inside, Ethan guided her to the kitchen table while he retrieved towels and the first aid kit Margaret had always kept meticulously stocked. The pilot set the case carefully beside her chair, keeping one hand resting on it while she surveyed the modest farmhouse kitchen. "I need to set that shoulder," Ethan said, returning with supplies. "I've done it before. Farm accidents happen. It'll hurt, but waiting makes it worse." The pilot nodded grimly. "I know the procedure. On 3. Ethan positioned himself properly, gripped her arm and shoulder, and counted. He moved on 2 rather than 3, an old trick that prevented patients from tensing up in anticipation. The pilot gasped as the joint slipped back into place, then exhaled slowly, relief evident despite the initial pain. "Military?" Ethan asked as he began cleaning the cut on her forehead. "In a manner of speaking," she replied guardedly. "I'm Commander Alexis Ward. The aircraft is classified, as is my mission. Officially neither exists. Yet here, you both are on my farm," Ethan observed dryly, applying a butterfly bandage to her wound. A faint smile flickered across her face. "Here we are, and I'm grateful for your help, but I need to be clear about something, Mr. Miller. What happened tonight potentially has national security implications. I need time to contact my superiors through secure channels, which I can't do until this storm passes. You're welcome to my landline, though it gets temperamental in weather like this." "No landlines," she said firmly. "I have equipment in the case, but it requires specific conditions." She glanced toward the windows, where rain lashed against the glass. "I'm asking for your discretion until morning. No calls to local authorities, no social media, nothing that might draw attention." Ethan finished bandaging her head wound and sat back, studying his unusual guest. Despite her injuries and bedraggled appearance, she carried herself with unmistakable authority. Whatever her true role, he sensed she was accustomed to command. "This farm is 30 miles from the nearest town. he said finally. "The only neighbor within 10 miles is old Jake Thornton, and he's nearly deaf. Your secret's safe for tonight, at least." Relief visibly washed over her. "Thank you. I promise you won't regret this." Ethan rose and moved to the stove, putting on a kettle for tea and retrieving leftovers from the refrigerator that could be easily reheated. As he prepared a simple meal, he contemplated the surreal turn his day had taken. That morning, his greatest concern had been the bank's foreclosure notice. Now he was harboring an injured military pilot, and a classified aircraft was crumpled in his north pasture. "You mentioned others might track the aircraft," he said, as he set a plate before her. "Who exactly are we expecting?" Commander Ward accepted the food gratefully, but answered cautiously. "Recovery teams, most likely. They'll secure the crash site and remove all evidence of the incident. From my property, without permission. National security supersedes property rights in certain circumstances," she replied, though her tone suggested she understood his concern. "But it would be simpler if I can make contact first. Explain the situation." "And what exactly is the situation, Commander?" Ethan pressed, his initial shock giving way to legitimate questions. "What brings a classified aircraft over my farm? This isn't exactly a strategic location." She considered him for a long moment, seemingly weighing how much to reveal. "I was returning from a reconnaissance mission. The storm wasn't on our meteorological forecasts. It developed rapidly and affected the aircraft systems. The technology is—" She paused, searching for words. "Sensitive to certain atmospheric conditions." It wasn't a complete explanation, and they both knew it, but Ethan sensed it was all he would get for now. He changed tack. "You should rest. There's a guest room upstairs, my daughter's old room. Bathrooms across the hall if you want to clean up more thoroughly. I've got some clothes that might fit well enough for tonight." "That's very kind," she said, genuine appreciation in her voice. "But I need to stay near the case." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You plan to sleep sitting at my kitchen table?" A wry smile crossed her face. "Wouldn't be the first uncomfortable night on duty, but no, I can manage stairs if the case comes with me." After showing Commander Ward to the guest room and providing her with privacy to clean up and change, Ethan returned downstairs. The storm continued unabated outside, occasional flashes of lightning illuminating the kitchen as he sat at the table, attempting to process the evening's events. His phone showed no service, not unusual during severe weather this far from cell towers. The landline, when he checked it, produced only static, confirming his earlier warning about its reliability. They were effectively cut off from outside communication until the storm passed. Ethan found himself staring at the digital clock on the microwave, watching minutes tick by with unusual awareness. What had Commander Ward been doing before her crash? What did the case contain that was so important she refused to let it out of her sight? And who exactly would come looking for them? He was still sitting there, questions circling in his mind, when he heard a sound from upstairs. A thud followed, by what might have been a muffled cry. Concerned that the pilot might have fallen in her weakened state, Ethan hurried up the stairs and knocked softly on the guest room door. "Commander Ward, are you all right?" No response came. He knocked again, louder. "Alexis, I'm coming in." The door wasn't locked. Ethan pushed it open cautiously to find the room empty at first glance. The mysterious case sat on the bed, but Commander Ward was nowhere visible. Then he spotted her on the floor between the bed and wall, unconscious, her breathing shallow. Ethan rushed to her side, checking her pulse and finding it rapid but present. The head wound he'd bandaged earlier had begun bleeding again, suggesting her injuries might be more severe than she'd admitted. Concussions could be deceptive, symptoms worsening hours after the initial trauma. As he gently lifted her back onto the bed, Ethan noticed something clutched in her hand, what appeared to be a small data device, similar to a flash drive but more complex, with a tiny screen now glowing with indecipherable symbols. It must have come from the case, which was now open, its contents partially visible. Sophisticated communications equipment, documents with prominent classified headers, and what looked like specialized tools. Ethan hesitated only briefly before, placing the device back in the case and closing it. Whatever secrets it contained weren't his concern. Getting proper medical help for Commander Ward was. Her earlier warnings notwithstanding, he couldn't in good conscience leave her untreated if her condition was deteriorating. He checked her vital signs again, relieved to find them stable if not ideal. Her breathing had steadied, and when he called her name, her eyelids fluttered, though she didn't fully regain consciousness. Ethan retrieved the first aid kit, redressed her head wound, and positioned her in the recovery position before pulling up a chair beside the bed to monitor her condition. Outside, the storm raged on, rain hammering against the roof and windows with occasional thunderclaps that shook the old farmhouse to its foundations. Ethan checked his watch. Just past midnight. The isolation that defined his daily existence now felt more absolute, more consequential than ever before. In the dim light of the bedside lamp, Commander Ward's face appeared younger, more vulnerable than it had downstairs. The authority that had marked her bearing even while injured seemed temporarily absent, replaced by the simple fragility of an injured human being. Whatever her mission, whatever secrets she carried, in this moment she was simply someone who needed help. Ethan settled in for a long night, determined to check her condition regularly until she regained consciousness or the storm passed enough to seek assistance. As he watched her breathe, his thoughts returned to the foreclosure notice, the failing farm, all the problems that had seemed overwhelming that morning. Those concerns hadn't disappeared, but they had been temporarily displaced by more immediate concerns. Life and death, secrets and safety, decisions that couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. The irony wasn't lost on him. After years of increasing isolation as the rural community around Cedar Ridge Farm gradually disappeared, his solitude had been dramatically interrupted by someone who had literally fallen from the sky. Whatever happened next would surely further disrupt the quiet desperation that had become his daily existence. As if in response to his thoughts, Commander Ward stirred, her eyes opening slightly. "The device," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Secure the device." "It's safe," Ethan assured her. "Everything's back in the case." She seemed to register his presence, focusing on his face with effort. "Thank you," she whispered, before slipping back into unconsciousness, her features relaxing as deeper sleep claimed her. Ethan continued his vigil as the hours passed, and the storm gradually diminished from violent fury to steady rainfall. Around 4 a.m., exhaustion overtook him, and he dozed in the chair, waking with a start at the first light of dawn filtering through the curtains. Commander Ward was awake, sitting up in bed, the case open beside her as she operated what appeared to be a sophisticated communications device. "You're looking better," Ethan observed, stretching to relieve the stiffness from sleeping upright. "I am," she confirmed, though dark circles beneath her eyes suggested otherwise. "Thank you for your care. I experienced a delayed reaction to the crash, not uncommon with head trauma. You should still see a doctor. That won't be necessary now." She gestured to the device. "I've made contact. A recovery team is en route." The statement should have been reassuring, but something in her tone put Ethan on alert. "That's good, right?" Commander Ward closed the case carefully before answering. "Mr. Miller, I want to be transparent with you. The team arriving is highly specialized. They'll secure the crash site and remove all evidence of the incident, including debriefing anyone with knowledge of it." "Debriefing," Ethan repeated flatly. "You mean ensuring my silence?" "Ensuring national security," she corrected, though not unkindly. "What crashed on your property yesterday incorporates technology that several foreign governments would go to extraordinary lengths to acquire. Even confirming its existence could compromise operations and personnel." Ethan moved to the window, gazing out at his rain-soaked fields, now gleaming in the early morning light. The storm had finally brought the moisture his crops desperately needed, but at what cost? "Will I be compensated for damage to my property?" he asked, the practical farmer reasserting himself. "Any disturbance will be fully restored," she assured him. "And yes, there will be compensation for your discretion and assistance." Significant compensation. The latter caught Ethan's attention. How significant? That would depend on several factors, including the total containment of information. She studied him with renewed intensity. "Mr. Miller, before the team arrives, I need to know if you've communicated with anyone about last night's events." "No," he answered truthfully. "The storm knocked out phone service. Even if it hadn't, I gave you my word." Relief crossed her features. "That simplifies matters considerably." She stood carefully, testing her balance. "The team will have questions. For both of us, it would be best if we present a unified account." As they descended to the kitchen, Ethan felt an uncomfortable shift in dynamics. The injured woman he'd rescued had been replaced by a government operative clearly accustomed to controlling information and managing potential security breaches. Though her manner remained polite, even grateful, there was a new distance between them. Ethan prepared breakfast, while Commander Ward made additional communications using equipment from the case. She spoke in coded language and technical terms. That meant nothing to him, though he caught occasional phrases that suggested the recovery operation was substantial and already in motion. "How long before they arrive?" he asked as he set plates on the table. "Less than an hour," she replied, accepting the offered meal with a nod of thanks. "They're coming by helicopter." The mundane act of sharing breakfast in his kitchen while discussing an imminent classified military operation struck Ethan as surreal. Yesterday, his greatest visitor excitement had been the occasional agricultural extension agent or equipment salesperson. Today, he was preparing to receive what sounded like a special operations team. "What happens to you after they secure everything?" he asked, realizing he knew almost nothing about the woman across from him, despite the intensity of their shared experience. "Debriefing, medical evaluation, reassignment," she listed matter-of-factly. "Standard protocol after any operational incident. And your aircraft. That technology seemed advanced." Commander Ward's expression remained neutral. "Advanced is one word for it. Let's just say it represents capabilities we prefer to keep confidential." They finished the meal in relative silence, each absorbed in private thoughts. Ethan cleared the dishes, then retrieved the foreclosure notice from his pocket, staring at it momentarily before placing it on the counter. Whatever significant compensation the government might offer, he couldn't help wondering if it would be enough to save Cedar Ridge Farm. As if reading his thoughts, Commander Ward spoke from behind him. "Financial troubles?" Ethan turned, surprised by her perception. "Is it that obvious? I notice details. It's part of my training." She gestured toward the property visible through the kitchen window. "The equipment is well maintained but older. Your work table has receipts for parts that suggest piecemeal repairs rather than replacement, and your expression when I mentioned compensation was telling." "The bank's foreclosing," Ethan admitted, seeing no reason to hide what local records would easily reveal. 3 generations of farming ending because drought doesn't respect family legacy. Before she could respond, the distinctive sound of approaching helicopters reached them. Commander Ward moved to the window, her posture straightening almost imperceptibly. "They're here," she said, her tone shifting to something more formal, more official. "Mr. Miller, I want to thank you for your assistance last night. What happens next may seem overwhelming, but please remember, these protocols exist for good reason." Ethan joined her at the window as 2 unmarked black helicopters appeared over the ridge, approaching the farmhouse with precision. Beyond them, in the direction of the crash site, he could see what appeared to be larger transport aircraft descending. "Quite the recovery team," he observed. "The situation warrants it." She placed a hand briefly on his arm, the gesture surprisingly personal after her professional distancing. "Whatever happens next, know that your actions last night mattered. You helped more than just me." As the helicopters landed in the open area before the farmhouse, uniformed personnel emerged with practiced efficiency. Commander Ward straightened. Her borrowed clothes, lifted the mysterious case, and moved toward the door with renewed authority despite her injuries. Ethan followed more slowly, watching as his quiet farm transformed into what resembled a military operations center within minutes. Vehicles began arriving via the access road, unmarked SUVs and equipment trucks moving with coordinated purpose. Personnel established a perimeter. Communications equipment appeared as if by magic, and at the center of it all, a distinguished older man in civilian clothes approached the porch. "Commander Ward," he greeted her with evident relief. "We were concerned when contact was lost." "The mission was completed, sir," she replied formally. "All objectives achieved despite the unexpected landing." The man turned his attention to Ethan, studying him with piercing intelligence. "And you must be Mr. Miller. I understand we owe you a debt of gratitude." "I just helped someone in need," Ethan replied, uncomfortable with the scrutiny. "Nevertheless, your assistance to Commander Ward was invaluable." He extended his hand. "I'm Director Harrington. We have some matters to discuss." As Ethan shook the offered hand, he couldn't help feeling that his life had irrevocably changed course, like a river diverted by some cataclysmic event. Whatever came next, debriefings, secrecy agreements, compensation, nothing would return to the quiet desperation that had defined his existence before the strange aircraft had fallen from the sky. Director Harrington gestured toward one of the vehicles. "If you'll accompany me, Mr. Miller, there are some sensitive aspects of this situation that require immediate attention." With a last glance at Commander Ward, who offered an encouraging nod. Ethan descended the porch steps into a new reality, one where his actions over the next few hours might determine not just the fate of his family farm, but his role in matters he had never imagined would touch his isolated existence. Director Harrington led Ethan toward a mobile command center that had materialized on his property within minutes of the helicopter's arrival. The vehicle resembled a luxury RV from the outside, but as they stepped inside, Ethan found himself in what appeared to be a sophisticated operations room filled with advanced technology and staffed by personnel working with practiced efficiency. "Please sit." The director indicated a chair at a small conference table separated from the main operations area by a privacy screen. As Ethan settled into the seat, he noticed the table's surface was itself a display screen, currently showing aerial imagery of his farm, including a highlighted area where the strange aircraft had crashed. "Coffee?" Harrington offered, gesturing to a carafe on a side table. "Thank you," Ethan accepted, finding comfort in the ordinary gesture amidst such extraordinary circumstances. As the director poured for them both, Ethan observed the man more carefully. Harrington appeared to be in his 60s, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority, yet his manner lacked the intimidating coldness Ethan might have expected from someone in his position. "Mr. Miller," Harrington began, settling across from him, "I want to first express our gratitude for your assistance to Commander Ward. Her mission was of considerable importance, and your intervention may well have prevented a significant national security breach." "I just did what anyone would do," Ethan replied modestly. Harrington's expression suggested he knew better. "In my experience, Mr. Miller, what people would just do varies considerably, particularly when a stranger arrives under suspicious circumstances requesting discretion about matters that would naturally provoke curiosity." He placed a thin folder on the table between them. "We've taken the liberty of gathering some information about you, distinguished military service in your youth. 3 generations of successful farming, despite increasingly difficult conditions. Active in your community until recent years. A man of principle from all accounts." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, disconcerted by the rapid compilation of his life's details. "You've been thorough. We're always thorough where national security is concerned." Harrington opened the folder, revealing what appeared to be standard government forms. "Which brings us to the matter at hand. What crashed on your property yesterday was a prototype aircraft incorporating classified technology. Its existence, specifications, and the mission it was conducting are all matters of the highest secrecy." Ethan nodded, having gathered as much from Commander Ward's behavior. "I assumed as much. What you may not have fully appreciated is the level of secrecy involved," Harrington continued. "This project falls under Special Access Program protocols, which means its very existence is known only to a select group with specific clearances." "And now me," Ethan observed. "And now you," Harrington confirmed, studying Ethan's reaction carefully, "which creates a rather unusual situation. Typically, anyone exposed to this level of classified information would already hold appropriate security clearances or would be subject to immediate containment protocols." "Containment protocols," Ethan repeated, not liking the sound of the phrase. "That doesn't sound pleasant." A slight smile crossed Harrington's face. "It's not as ominous as it sounds." In most cases, it simply means restricted movement and communications, while a determination is made regarding the individual's reliability. He tapped the folder. In your case, preliminary assessment suggests you're a person of integrity who understands the concept of duty. Commander Ward's report of your conduct reinforces this impression. Harrington leaned forward slightly, his expression growing more serious. However, I must be absolutely clear about something, Mr. Miller. What you've witnessed cannot be shared, not with family, not with friends, not with anyone. The documentation I've brought requires your legally binding commitment to absolute secrecy about all aspects of this incident. Ethan glanced at the forms, recognizing their significance. And if I were to decline, that would create complications. I'd prefer to avoid, Harrington replied, his tone remaining conversational despite the implicit warning. It would necessitate more intensive containment measures and might limit our ability to be generous regarding compensation for your cooperation. The reference to compensation reminded Ethan of Commander Ward's earlier assurance of significant recompense. With the bank's foreclosure deadline looming, financial considerations couldn't be dismissed lightly. What exactly would this compensation entail? He asked cautiously. Harrington seemed pleased by the practical question. Standard protocol allows for reasonable financial accommodation for civilian cooperation in sensitive matters. In this case, given the extremely classified nature of the information and your direct assistance to Commander Ward, we have latitude for a more substantial arrangement. He turned the table display to reveal what appeared to be financial figures, an amount that made Ethan blink in surprise. The sum displayed would more than cover his bank debt, with enough remaining to update critical equipment and still maintain a comfortable operating reserve. That's generous, Ethan managed, trying to maintain his composure despite the lifeline being unexpectedly offered. It's appropriate, Harrington countered. You provided aid that potentially preserved technology, representing billions in research and development, not to mention protecting operations that directly impact national security. We value that contribution. Ethan studied the older man, searching for signs of manipulation or deception. Finding none, he reached for the offered pen. Where do I sign? The next hour passed in a blur of detailed documentation. Ethan signed multiple non-disclosure agreements, each more specific and stringent than the last. He provided recorded statements about his encounter with Commander Ward and his observations of the aircraft, answered questions about anyone he might have contacted during the incident, none, and underwent what Harrington casually described as a preliminary security assessment interview, but which felt remarkably like a sophisticated lie detector test. Throughout the process, Ethan was struck by the professionalism of everyone involved. Despite the extraordinary nature of the situation, each step was conducted with a matter-of-fact efficiency that somehow normalized what was, in reality, an utterly surreal experience for a farmer whose most exciting recent event had been a blue ribbon at the county fair 3 years ago. Outside the mobile command center, the recovery operation continued with military precision. Through the vehicle's tinted windows, Ethan could see teams securing the crash site, specialized equipment being deployed, and what appeared to be a thorough documentation of the entire area before any alterations were made. Your property will be fully restored, Harrington assured him, following his gaze. Our environmental teams are already taking soil and vegetation samples to ensure exact replacement of anything disturbed during recovery operations. We pride ourselves on leaving no trace. What about the crash path? Ethan asked, thinking of the furrow cut through his north pasture. Repaired to original condition with appropriate compensation for any crop damage. You'll find we're quite thorough, Mr. Miller. Harrington closed the final folder and extended his hand. I believe that concludes our immediate business. The financial compensation we discussed will be processed immediately, with funds available in your account by close of business today. An operations liaison will remain on site until restoration is complete, after which periodic security follow-ups will be conducted. Standard procedure, he added, seeing Ethan's expression. Ethan shook the offered hand, still processing the rapid transformation of his circumstances. 24 hours ago, he had been facing the loss of his family legacy. Now he had the means to save it, at the seemingly simple cost of keeping secret something he would scarcely have believed possible anyway. One last thing, Harrington said as they prepared to exit the vehicle. Commander Ward requested a moment to speak with you before her medical evacuation. She's waiting in your home, if you'd like to see her. Ethan nodded, finding himself oddly eager to speak with the mysterious pilot once more. Despite the brevity of their acquaintance, they had shared an intensity of experience that created a unique connection. He found Commander Ward in his kitchen, now dressed in a standard military flight suit, her injuries professionally treated. The mysterious case sat beside her on the table, still apparently never far from her reach. Mr. Miller, she greeted him, rising as he entered. I wanted to thank you personally before departure. Your assistance last night was invaluable. You seem to be recovering well, he observed, noting her improved color and steadier stance. Excellent medical team, she replied with a slight smile, though your initial care was surprisingly competent for a civilian. Farm accidents teach emergency medicine better than any classroom, Ethan said, taking a seat across from her. Besides, it's not the first dislocated shoulder I've seen. The lieutenant frowned slightly. There seems to be some miscommunication. I can contact command for clarification. That won't be necessary, a familiar voice interrupted. Director Harrington was approaching from one of the escort vehicles, looking remarkably fresh, despite what had presumably been a very long night. Mr. Miller, please excuse the early arrival. I'd intended to be here before the convoy to explain the situation. Ethan turned to the director, confusion evident. You're delivering farm equipment? That wasn't part of our agreement. Consider it an addendum, Harrington replied smoothly. May we discuss this privately? Inside the kitchen, Harrington accepted the offered coffee before explaining. The financial compensation we provided was indeed the formal arrangement for your cooperation. This, he gestured toward the convoy visible through the window, is something different. I don't understand, Ethan said honestly. For the next several hours, Ethan observed in growing amazement as military personnel with unexpected agricultural knowledge efficiently positioned and installed equipment that represented the most advanced farming technology available. Each piece came with comprehensive documentation, secure digital access for software updates, and contact information for technical support, all carefully arranged to appear as standard R&D field testing to any outside observer. Director Harrington remained throughout the process, occasionally offering explanations about particular features or technologies incorporated into the equipment. His knowledge suggested more than a passing familiarity with agricultural matters, a fact Ethan eventually commented on. Ethan carefully returned the card to his wallet. Whatever secrets had fallen from the sky onto his property were now part of his own story, woven into the fabric of Cedar Ridge Farm's continuing legacy. Tomorrow would bring the practical work of farming, now transformed by technology but unchanged in its essential purpose. The wheat still needed tending, the land still required stewardship, and his responsibility remained what it had always been, to preserve something valuable for those who would come after. Outside, the night sky above Cedar Ridge Farm spread, vast and clear. The storm that had brought both rain and unexpected visitors, now just a memory. Stars glittered with particular brightness, as if affirming the extraordinary potential that could emerge from ordinary compassion and the profound connections that could form in the briefest of encounters. 3 months had passed since the extraordinary events that had transformed Cedar Ridge Farm from a property on the brink of foreclosure to a showcase of agricultural innovation. The advanced equipment delivered by the military convoy had revolutionized Ethan's operation, allowing him to harvest his modest crop with unprecedented efficiency and precision. Even the drought-damaged wheat had yielded better than expected, thanks to the harvester's ability to adjust on the fly to varying crop conditions. The North Pasture, where Commander Ward's experimental aircraft had crashed, showed no signs of the incident. True to Director Harrington's word, the restoration teams had repaired the damage with scientific precision, replacing soil and vegetation, so perfectly that even Ethan, who knew the land intimately, could barely identify where the crash had occurred. On this crisp October morning, Ethan stood at the edge of a recently harvested field, watching the sun rise over land that had been in his family for 3 generations and would now, thanks to an extraordinary chance encounter, remain in his care. The financial compensation from the government had cleared his debt with the bank, while the advanced equipment had dramatically improved his operational efficiency. Cedar Ridge Farm wasn't just surviving, it was thriving in ways Ethan had scarcely imagined possible just months earlier. Yet despite these positive developments, Ethan found himself increasingly preoccupied by the classified nature of what he had witnessed. The non-disclosure agreements he had signed prohibited him from discussing the incident with anyone, creating an isolation different from but no less challenging than the financial stress he had previously faced. The experience of having an extraordinary secret, one with apparent national security implications, weighed on him in unexpected ways. His daughter, Caroline, was scheduled to arrive today for her first visit home since the incident. Her 3-month agricultural development assignment in East Africa had concluded, and she had accepted a position with a domestic research initiative that would allow more frequent visits to the farm. Ethan looked forward to her company, but dreaded the inevitable questions about the farm's dramatic transformation. The cover story suggested by Director Harrington, participation in an agricultural technology testing program, seemed plausible enough, but Ethan worried that Caroline's scientific training and natural skepticism might lead her to probe for details he couldn't provide. She knew him too well. Would she sense the gaps in his explanation, the careful omissions required to maintain his secrecy agreement? Part of the testing program, Ethan explained. The partial truth easier to maintain than a complete fabrication. They're interested in integrating technology across all aspects of farm management. Caroline accepted the offered coffee but continued her careful assessment. Her analytical mind, the same quality that made her an excellent agricultural scientist, was clearly processing the changes with healthy skepticism. "The bank was threatening foreclosure the last time we spoke," she said finally, addressing directly what Ethan had hoped to approach more gradually. "Then suddenly, you're selected for an elite technology testing program with equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's quite a reversal of fortune, Dad." Ethan had prepared for this line of questioning, but the reality of looking his daughter in the eye while maintaining necessary secrecy proved more difficult than anticipated. "The program includes financial support," he said, the statement technically true if enormously understated. "It resolved the immediate crisis with the bank." "Just like that?" Caroline pressed, her expression revealing she sensed there was more to the story. "These programs typically have extensive application processes, multiple site evaluations, legal negotiations. You never mentioned applying for anything like this." "It was a rapid deployment initiative," Ethan said, drawing on terminology he had heard Director Harrington use. "Sometimes these agencies have funding that needs to be allocated quickly before budget cycles close." Caroline studied him over the rim of her coffee cup, her expression suggesting she wasn't entirely convinced but wasn't ready to push harder yet. "Well, I'm grateful for whatever agricultural fairy godmother waved her wand over Cedar Ridge Farm. I was worried sick about you and this place." The mention of magical intervention hit uncomfortably close to how Ethan himself sometimes viewed what had happened. An almost supernatural intervention that had rescued generations of family legacy through the most improbable of circumstances. "How about a tour?" he suggested, eager to move the conversation to more comfortable territory. "You can see the new systems in action. Some of the soil monitoring technology might interest you professionally." Outside, Ethan guided Caroline through the transformed operation, explaining the various technologies now integrated into Cedar Ridge Farm's daily operations. The advanced irrigation system, with its precise water management capabilities, drew particular interest from Caroline, whose research often focused on agricultural water conservation techniques. "This system uses predictive modeling and soil moisture sensors to optimize water application," Ethan explained, finding relief in discussing technical aspects that didn't directly touch on the classified incident. "It's reduced water usage by nearly 30% while improving crop health." Caroline examined the equipment with professional appreciation. "This is military-grade technology adapted for agricultural use," she observed. "I saw similar systems being developed for deployment in conflict zones where water infrastructure had been compromised. How did it end up on a testing program for civilian farms?" The question hit uncomfortably close to the truth. "Cross-sector technology transfer, I believe they called it," Ethan replied, the explanation plausible enough to be believable. "Adapting defense research for civilian applications." As they continued the tour, Caroline's questions became increasingly specific, her scientific mind identifying inconsistencies or unusual aspects that Ethan struggled to explain within the constraints of his cover story. By the time they reached the North Pasture, site of the crash, Ethan found himself choosing words with painful care, aware that even the smallest slip might reveal more than his agreements permitted. "This area looks different," Caroline noted, surveying the pasture with a researcher's eye for detail. "The vegetation pattern is slightly more uniform than I remember. and the soil color has a different consistency. Ethan suppressed his surprise at her perception. We had some erosion issues after a big storm this summer, he explained. The partial truth, again, easier than complete fabrication. Part of the environmental management aspect of the program involved soil restoration techniques. Caroline knelt to examine the soil more closely. They did remarkable work. The microbial balance seems optimized, and the ground cover establishment is textbook perfect. This goes beyond standard restoration practices. The technicians were very thorough, Ethan agreed, relieved that her scientific interest seemed focused on the methodology rather than questioning why such advanced restoration had been undertaken on a seemingly ordinary pasture. As they made their way back toward the farmhouse, a sleek black SUV appeared on the distant access road, moving with purpose toward Cedar Ridge Farm. Ethan recognized the vehicle type immediately, identical to those used during the recovery operation 3 months earlier. His pulse quickened. No follow-up visit had been scheduled, and Director Harrington had indicated that routine security checks would be conducted with advance notice. "Are you expecting company?" Caroline asked, noting her father's sudden tension. "Probably representatives from the testing program," Ethan replied, hoping his voice sounded more casual than he felt. "They conduct periodic assessments." As the SUV approached, Ethan recognized the driver, not Director Harrington, but one of his aides who had been present during the initial debriefing. The vehicle stopped at a respectful distance, and a young man in business casual attire emerged, carrying a tablet and what appeared to be standard documenting materials. "Mr. Miller," he called with professional courtesy, approaching at a measured pace. "I apologize for arriving unannounced. I'm David Chen from the Agricultural Technology Initiative. We have some updated protocols for the monitoring systems we'd like to review with you." The cover identity was seamless, exactly as Harrington had described in their initial meetings. A legitimate-appearing government contractor that could interact with civilians without raising suspicion. Chen's gaze shifted to Caroline, and Ethan noted the subtle reassessment in his expression. "This is my daughter, Dr. Carolyn Miller," Ethan introduced, emphasizing her professional title. "She's an agricultural researcher just returned from an international assignment." "Dr. Miller," Chen acknowledged with a respectful nod. "Your father's participation in our program has been exemplary. His feedback on the irrigation systems has been particularly valuable." Caroline shook the offered hand, her scientific curiosity evident. "I'd be interested to learn more about your initiative, Mr. Chen. The technology you've deployed here incorporates several experimental approaches I've only seen in theoretical applications." A barely perceptible hesitation suggested Chen was calibrating his response. "We integrate research from various sectors," he explained smoothly. "Perhaps we could discuss it further after I complete the scheduled protocol review with your father." "Of course," Caroline agreed, though Ethan recognized her expression. She wasn't going to let the matter drop entirely. "I'll get lunch started while you handle the technical details." As Caroline headed toward the house, Chen turned to Ethan with a lowered voice. "Sir, we weren't aware your daughter would be visiting. Director Harrington sent me to conduct a standard security assessment, but her presence complicates matters slightly." "She arrived this morning," Ethan explained, equally quiet. "Her background is exclusively agricultural. She has no connection to defense or security sectors." Chen nodded, processing the information. Nevertheless, her scientific training makes her more likely to identify inconsistencies or question explanations that others might accept at face value. Has she inquired about the technology origins or the circumstances of your selection for the program? She's naturally curious, Ethan admitted, but I've maintained the cover story as directed. Good. Chen glanced toward the house. We should proceed with the standard assessment quickly. Then I'll engage with her professionally to reinforce the testing program narrative. Director Harrington anticipated this situation might arise eventually and prepared appropriate briefing materials for family members with relevant scientific backgrounds. For the next hour, Chen conducted what appeared to be a routine inspection of the equipment, while actually performing a security assessment of the property. He checked for any evidence that might remain from the incident, verified that monitoring systems placed discreetly around the farm perimeter were functioning properly, and updated security protocols on the communications equipment provided to Ethan. Throughout the process, Chen maintained a professional demeanor while providing Ethan with guidance on handling Caroline's questions. Emphasis on the proprietary nature of certain technologies is usually effective with scientists, he advised. They understand confidentiality in research contexts. If pressed, acknowledge that some aspects are classified for competitive reasons, rather than security concerns that's often more acceptable to civilian researchers. When they returned to the farmhouse, Caroline had prepared lunch and set the table for 3, a clear indication she intended to join the conversation. Chen accepted the invitation with grace, seamlessly transitioning into his role as a government agricultural technology representative. Throughout the meal, Caroline directed increasingly specific questions about the testing program to Chen, who responded with well-prepared explanations that provided enough technical detail to satisfy scientific curiosity while carefully avoiding any reference to the actual origins of the technology. Ethan watched the exchange with a mixture of admiration for Chen's skill and concern that Caroline's persistent questions might eventually corner them into contradictions. The irrigation system integrates weather pattern prediction algorithms originally developed for climate modeling, Chen explained in response to one particularly probing question. By adapting military-grade hardware to civilian applications, we've achieved efficiency levels previously considered theoretical. The military connection explains the advanced materials science, Caroline acknowledged, but the implementation timeline seems compressed compared to typical technology transfer. Protocols. Usually there's a more gradual deployment phase. Budget cycles sometimes create unusual opportunities, Chen replied smoothly. When funding alignments occur between departments, rapid deployment initiatives can be authorized to demonstrate cross-sector benefits before appropriations committees. The explanation seemed to satisfy Caroline temporarily, though Ethan noted her continued, thoughtful expression. She was cataloging information, connecting dots in her methodical scientific way. While she might not arrive at the exact truth, her trained mind would eventually identify the gaps in their narrative. After lunch, Chen requested a private word with Ethan before departure. Outside on the porch, safely out of Caroline's hearing, his manner became more direct. Mr. Miller, your daughter presents a higher security awareness challenge than anticipated. Her technical knowledge and analytical approach make the standard cover narrative vulnerable to scrutiny over time. He handed Ethan a small device resembling a thumb drive. Director Harrington authorized me to provide this. It contains enhanced backstopping for the testing program, press materials, technical specifications cleared for civilian review, and documentation of similar initiatives that establish precedent for the narrative. Is Caroline in any danger because of what happened here? Ethan asked directly, voicing the concern that had troubled him since her arrival. No, Chen assured him without hesitation. The security protocols are to protect classified information, not to threaten civilians. Your daughter is free to pursue any legitimate inquiries about agricultural technology. We simply provide sufficient validated information to make extraordinary explanations unnecessary. After Chen's departure, Ethan found Caroline in the kitchen, her expression thoughtful as she prepared coffee. He was very knowledgeable, she observed, though remarkably evasive about certain specifics. Government programs involve a lot of bureaucracy and confidentiality, Ethan replied, trying to sound casual. The technical people don't always have access to the administrative details. Caroline handed him a cup of coffee, her direct gaze suggesting she wasn't entirely convinced. Dad, I've worked with enough government agricultural initiatives to recognize standard practices. Whatever's happening here isn't standard. She held up a hand as Ethan began to respond. And I'm not asking you to violate any confidentiality agreements. I just want you to know that I understand there may be aspects you can't discuss. The statement, delivered with calm acceptance rather than suspicion, caught Ethan off guard. What makes you say that? The technology deployment pattern doesn't match typical agricultural initiatives. The security awareness of your technical representative exceeds standard protocols. And most tellingly, she added with a slight smile, you've been choosing your words with extraordinary care since I arrived, which isn't like you at all. Ethan felt a complex mix of emotions, concern about security obligations, pride in his daughter's perceptiveness, and relief that she wasn't pushing for explanations he couldn't provide. Caroline, Don't, she interrupted gently. Whatever happened here that turned around the farm's prospects, I'm grateful for it. I was preparing myself to help you transition away from Cedar Ridge, watching 3 generations of our family's work disappear under corporate acquisition. Instead, I find the farm not just saved, but advancing with technology that could keep independent agriculture viable for another generation. She sipped her coffee before continuing. In my work internationally, I've seen enough to know that sometimes extraordinary circumstances create opportunities that don't fit neat explanations. Whatever confluence of events brought these resources here, I'm simply thankful it happened. The understanding in her voice, the willingness to accept what he could share while respecting the boundaries of what he couldn't, lifted a weight Ethan hadn't fully acknowledged he was carrying. For months, he had worried about this moment, about keeping secrets from the person closest to him while explaining the farm's dramatic transformation. The technology really is remarkable, he offered, staying within safe boundaries. The precision agriculture applications alone have reduced input costs significantly while improving yield quality. That's what matters, Caroline affirmed. Not how it got here, but what it means for Cedar Ridge Farm and potentially for other independent producers if these systems become more widely available. As evening approached, they moved to the porch, continuing their conversation about the farm's future with a new ease now that the unspoken tension had been acknowledged. Caroline shared insights from her international work that might apply to Cedar Ridge's operations, while Ethan described the improvements already evident from the new technology. The sunset painted the western sky in brilliant hues, remarkably similar to the evening when Commander Ward's aircraft had descended onto the North Pasture, a coincidence that struck Ethan with peculiar significance. That night had begun with acceptance of apparent failure, only to transform through an extraordinary encounter into unexpected possibility. Tonight, he had approached conversation with his daughter expecting difficult navigation of classified boundaries, only to discover understanding he hadn't anticipated. "I've been thinking," Caroline said as darkness settled around them. "The research initiative I've joined has funding for field testing stations. With your permission, I'd like to propose Cedar Ridge Farm as a satellite site. It would create a legitimate academic framework for some of the advanced applications you're implementing, and potentially open channels for wider distribution of successful techniques." The suggestion represented a perfect integration of their situations, providing additional legitimate cover for the classified technology while advancing Caroline's research and potentially benefiting other farmers. Whether Chen and his organization would approve remained to be seen, but the concept elegantly addressed several challenges simultaneously. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Ethan replied sincerely. "Though I suspect your government friends might want to review the proposal before we proceed," Caroline added with a knowing smile, "for proper protocol alignment, of course." The perceptive comment confirmed what Ethan had already realized. Caroline understood far more than she was directly acknowledging. She had pieced together enough to recognize that Cedar Ridge Farm's transformation involved matters beyond standard agricultural programs, yet she had found a way to respect the boundaries while still engaging constructively with the situation. "I'm sure they would appreciate the professional courtesy," Ethan agreed, returning her smile. "Protocol alignment is always important in government initiatives." Later that night, after Caroline had gone to bed, Ethan sat alone in the kitchen, contemplating the day's developments. The security follow-up, though unexpected, had provided valuable support for maintaining the cover narrative. More significantly, Caroline's perceptive understanding had transformed what he had feared would be an ongoing challenge of secrecy into a potential partnership that respected necessary boundaries while allowing meaningful collaboration. He retrieved Commander Ward's contact card from his wallet, studying the simple design that represented such an extraordinary connection. Though he had never used it, its presence had provided a certain reassurance during the months since the incident, a tangible reminder that the remarkable events had truly occurred, and that, if necessary, a line of communication remained open. Tomorrow, he would show Caroline more of the farm's new capabilities, continuing to operate within the boundaries of his secrecy agreements, while embracing the opportunity for genuine collaboration that her understanding had created. The isolation he had felt since signing those documents had eased considerably, replaced by a new appreciation for his daughter's perception and discretion. Outside, the night sky above Cedar Ridge Farm spread vast and clear, stars glittering, in patterns unchanged for millennia, despite the technological revolutions occurring below. 3 generations of millers had worked this land, each facing different challenges, each finding ways to adapt and continue the legacy. Ethan's challenge had involved an extraordinary classified encounter, but the fundamental task remained the same, preserving something valuable for those who would come after. As he prepared for bed, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. The farm's financial security had been established through the compensation provided after Commander Ward's crash landing. Its technological advancement had been accelerated through the equipment delivered as a result of that extraordinary encounter. Now, with Caroline's understanding and proposed research partnership, the final piece was falling into place, a sustainable path forward that honored both his obligations to secrecy and his commitment to agricultural innovation. The morning would bring new conversations, careful planning, and continued navigation of the unexpected path his life had taken. But for the first time since signing those classified documents 3 months earlier, Ethan felt fully aligned with both his obligations and his values, no longer torn between security requirements and family transparency. Cedar Ridge Farm stood at the intersection of classified technology and generations of agricultural tradition, an unlikely convergence, created by a simple act of compassion toward an injured pilot on a stormy night. Whatever the future held, that moment of human connection had altered the trajectory not just of Ethan's farm, but potentially of agricultural innovation more broadly. A reminder that extraordinary outcomes often begin with ordinary kindness, offered without expectation of return. The North Pasture, where Commander Ward had crashed, showed no visible evidence of that pivotal event, the advanced restoration having erased all physical traces. Yet in a deeper sense, everything at Cedar Ridge Farm now bore the imprint of that encounter, a transformation born not from the technology itself, but from the human connections it had facilitated, connections that continued to evolve in ways Ethan could never have anticipated when he first heard strange engines cutting through the evening sky. As sleep approached, Ethan found himself reflecting on his grandfather's words about farming being an act of faith, planting seeds with no guarantee of harvest, trusting in processes that unfolded according to their own timelines rather than human schedules. His decision to help Commander Ward had been similarly rooted in fundamental values rather than calculated benefits. The extraordinary rewards that had followed were not the purpose of that decision, but its unforeseen consequence. A reminder that actions grounded in core principles often yielded outcomes beyond imagination. Tomorrow would bring practical discussions of research protocols and technology applications, but the deeper current running beneath these conversations was the continuation of something his grandfather had begun, a commitment to stewardship that transcended immediate circumstances. The classified technology now supporting Cedar Ridge Farm represented cutting-edge innovation, yet it served a purpose as ancient as agriculture itself, the careful tending of resources for current needs, while preserving possibilities for future generations. With this thought providing a framework that connected past, present, and future, Ethan finally drifted to sleep, at peace with both the extraordinary secret he carried and the unexpected understanding that had emerged from his daughter's perceptive compassion, another reminder that human connection ultimately mattered more than technological advancement, despite the remarkable capabilities now at his disposal. 18 months after Commander Ward's crash landing on Cedar Ridge Farm, Ethan Miller stood before a gathering of regional farmers, agricultural scientists, and government officials. The farm's central barn, once a simple storage space for equipment and hay, had been transformed into a state-of-the-art demonstration center, showcasing the revolutionary farming techniques now implemented throughout the property. Sleek displays highlighted dramatic improvements in crop yields, water conservation, and soil health achieved through what the presentation materials carefully described as next-generation agricultural technology. What you're seeing today Ethan explained to the attentive audience, isn't just about advanced equipment. It's about integrating technology with generational knowledge, honoring traditional farming wisdom while embracing innovation that can make independent agriculture sustainable for decades to come. Caroline stood at the back of the room, watching her father with undisguised pride. The past year had seen Cedar Ridge Farm evolve from a struggling family operation into a nationally recognized center for agricultural innovation. The research partnership she had proposed during her first visit home had expanded beyond all expectations, creating a legitimate framework for the advanced technology while providing a model other independent farmers could adapt to their own operations. As Ethan concluded his presentation, Director Harrington, introduced to the gathering simply as Thomas Harrington Agricultural Technology Initiative, stepped forward to elaborate on the program's broader implications. His presence at the event had been carefully choreographed, balancing security protocols with the public relations value of having a senior government representative visibly supporting the initiative. What's happening at Cedar Ridge Farm represents the future of American agriculture, Harrington stated with conviction, not corporate consolidation that displaces family farmers, but targeted technology transfer that empowers independent producers to thrive in challenging conditions. The atmosphere in the room crackled with excitement as farmers who had been facing circumstances similar to Ethan's 18 months earlier saw tangible evidence that another path existed, one that didn't require surrendering generations of family legacy to corporate agriculture. After the formal presentations, attendees explored the demonstration stations throughout the property, examining equipment modifications, soil management techniques, and data systems that had produced Cedar Ridge's remarkable transformation. Caroline led technical discussions at several stations, her scientific expertise providing credibility to the more advanced applications while carefully respecting the boundaries of classified information. Ethan found himself surrounded by neighbors and fellow farmers, fielding questions about implementation costs, learning curves, and practical challenges. The cover story had evolved over time, growing more robust and detailed as Cedar Ridge's success attracted wider attention. What had begun as a hastily constructed explanation for sudden financial salvation had developed into a comprehensive narrative about government-sponsored technology transfer programs designed to preserve independent agriculture. The initial investment is substantial, Ethan acknowledged to a group of farmers studying the advanced irrigation system. But the Agricultural Technology Initiative provides financing options specifically designed for family operations. The return on investment has been faster than I anticipated. Water usage down nearly 40%, while yields have increased consistently. The technical language of agricultural efficiency came naturally now, masking the extraordinary circumstances that had actually brought the technology to Cedar Ridge Farm. After 18 months of maintaining the cover story, Ethan had nearly convinced himself of its reality, almost forgetting sometimes that his farm's transformation had begun not with a government grant application, but with an experimental aircraft crashing in his north pasture during a summer storm. As the demonstration day continued, Ethan noticed a familiar black SUV arriving discreetly at the far end of the property. A figure emerged that he immediately recognized despite the distance. Commander Alexis Ward, now walking with no trace of the injuries that had marked their first encounter. She remained at a respectful distance from the main gathering, observing the proceedings from the perimeter in civilian clothes that wouldn't attract attention among the diverse attendees. Ethan made his way toward her, careful not to appear hurried or draw notice to their meeting. As he approached, he was struck by how different she looked in ordinary circumstances, still carrying herself with military precision, but blending seamlessly into the civilian environment in ways he wouldn't have imagined possible during their dramatic first meeting. "Commander Ward," he greeted her quietly when he reached a conversational distance. "This is unexpected." "Mr. Miller," she replied with a warm smile that transformed her serious features. "I'm here unofficially. Director Harrington mentioned today's demonstration, and I wanted to see the outcomes of our chance encounter for myself." They walked slowly along the property's edge, maintaining a casual appearance that wouldn't attract attention from the main gathering. "I never properly thanked you," Ward continued, after they had established some privacy. "My report documented your assistance, of course, but official acknowledgement rarely captures the human element adequately. The government's appreciation was more than generous," Ethan assured her, gesturing toward the flourishing farm around them. "The technology transfer was Harrington's initiative," she clarified, "though I may have advocated rather persistently for it. But technology alone doesn't create what you've accomplished here." She nodded toward the gathering, where farmers were engaging enthusiastically with the demonstrations. "You've built something far beyond equipment enhancement. You've created hope for an entire community of independent producers." The observation struck Ethan deeply because it articulated precisely what had become his mission over the past 18 months. What had begun as personal financial salvation had evolved into something much more meaningful, a model that could potentially preserve not just Cedar Ridge Farm, but the entire ecosystem of family farming that had once defined rural America. "It wasn't my initial intention," he admitted. "At first, I was just trying to save my own operation. But as the technology demonstrated its potential, it became clear that keeping it confined to one farm would be wasteful. Caroline's research partnership created the framework for wider implementation, and things expanded naturally from there." Commander Ward studied the demonstration with professional assessment. "The security protocols have held remarkably well. Your cover narrative has developed significant credibility in agricultural circles." "Having legitimate results helps," Ethan replied. "When farmers see real improvements in yield and resource efficiency, they ask fewer questions about where the technology originated. Results matter more than backstory in agriculture." Their conversation was interrupted by Caroline approaching from the main gathering, datapad in hand and clearly focused on finding her father. When she spotted him with Commander Ward, Ethan noticed her momentary hesitation, the subtle reassessment that revealed her immediate recognition that this wasn't an ordinary demonstration attendee. "Dad, the representatives from the Agricultural Extension Office have some specific questions about the soil remediation techniques," she said, maintaining professional composure while studying Commander Ward with barely concealed curiosity. "Dr. Caroline Miller, my daughter," Ethan introduced, choosing careful neutrality. "This is Alexis Ward, a program consultant with the Agricultural Technology Initiative." The introduction adhered to security protocols while acknowledging Caroline's likely perception that this visitor represented something beyond the public narrative. The two women exchanged greetings with mutual assessment. "Your research integration with Cedar Ridge's practical applications has created an exceptional demonstration model," Commander Ward observed, speaking to Caroline with professional respect, rather than the condescension scientists often received from government representatives. The soil regeneration protocols particularly impressed Director Harrington's technical team. "We've built on existing research," Caroline replied modestly, though Ethan detected her subtle evaluation of Ward's unexpected technical knowledge. Cedar Ridge's unique circumstances provided an ideal testing environment for theories that hadn't previously been implemented at scale. The exchange continued briefly, with precise technical language that maintained the public narrative while allowing both women to demonstrate their expertise. Ethan watched with fascination as they established a mutual professional respect despite the carefully maintained boundaries of classified information. "I should return to the agricultural extension representatives," Caroline finally said, her expression suggesting she had formed her own conclusions about Commander Ward's actual role. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Ms. Ward. Your perspective on these initiatives is illuminating." After Caroline's departure, Commander Ward smiled slightly. "Your daughter is remarkably perceptive. She suspects there's more to the story, doesn't she?" "Caroline has a scientist's mind," Ethan acknowledged. "She notices patterns and inconsistencies. We've never discussed anything beyond the official narrative, but she understands that some aspects of the program involve higher security classifications than others." "That discretion is valuable," Ward noted. "Director Harrington mentioned she's been instrumental in developing the civilian applications while respecting information boundaries." They continued walking, observing the demonstration day from a distance that provided both perspective and privacy. "I sometimes wonder," Ethan said after a thoughtful pause, "what would have happened if your aircraft hadn't experienced problems directly over my property that night. If you had crashed 5 miles east, you would have been in the national forest with potentially no assistance for critical hours." Commander Ward considered this with military assessment. Contingency protocols existed, though recovery would have been significantly delayed in remote terrain. The technology would likely have been secured eventually, but the personal outcomes would have been less certain. The understated acknowledgement of potential personal peril reminded Ethan of the human stakes behind the classified technology. That beyond national security implications, a life had hung in the balance during those crucial early hours after the crash, and Cedar Ridge Farm would likely have been foreclosed upon by now, Ethan added, completing the counterfactual scenario. Another family operation absorbed by corporate agriculture, 3 generations of stewardship ended. Instead, you've created something that might preserve dozens of similar operations, Ward observed. Sometimes the most significant outcomes emerge from seemingly random intersections of circumstance. The philosophical observation seemed uncharacteristic, coming from someone Ethan had initially perceived as purely military in outlook. He was reminded that people, like situations, were often more complex than initial impressions suggested. "I should rejoin the main demonstration," Ethan said, noting that his extended absence might eventually draw attention. "Will you stay for the remainder of the presentations?" "Unfortunately, no," Commander Ward replied. "I have operational commitments elsewhere. I simply wanted to see firsthand what had developed from our unexpected encounter." She extended her hand. "It's been illuminating, Mr. Miller. What you've built here matters, not just for agriculture, but for the larger principle that technology should serve human communities rather than displacing them." As they shook hands, Ethan sensed a depth of sincerity in her words that transcended professional courtesy. Whatever classified operations Commander Ward typically conducted, her interest in Cedar Ridge Farm's development appeared genuinely personal rather than merely official. "The contact information I provided remains valid," she added, referring to the card she had given him 18 months earlier. "Should circumstances ever warrant direct communication." After Commander Ward's departure, Ethan rejoined the main demonstration, guiding another group of farmers through the advanced systems that had transformed Cedar Ridge's operations. Throughout the remainder of the day, he found his thoughts returning to their conversation and her observation about random intersections of circumstance, creating unexpected outcomes. When the demonstration concluded and the last visitors departed, Ethan, Caroline, and Director Harrington gathered in the farmhouse kitchen for a debriefing session. The familiar space, where Ethan had first tended Commander Ward's injuries 18 months earlier, now served as an informal conference room where classified and unclassified worlds carefully intersected. "Today exceeded expectations," Harrington stated with satisfaction. "The agricultural community's response indicates we've achieved the right balance between innovation and accessibility. Farmers can envision implementing modified versions of these systems on their own operations without being overwhelmed by the technology gap. The financing options were particularly well received," Caroline added, reviewing feedback data on her tablet. "Demonstrating practical acquisition pathways makes the technology seem attainable rather than merely theoretical." Ethan listened to their professional assessment while preparing coffee, struck by how completely his kitchen had transformed from a place of solitary worry 18 months ago to this center of collaborative planning. The changes extended far beyond the advanced equipment in his fields or the financial security in his accounts. They reached into the fundamental purpose that now drove Cedar Ridge Farm's operations. Commander Ward attended briefly, Ethan mentioned as he served the coffee, watching Harrington's reaction carefully. "I'm aware," the director replied without surprise. "She informed me of her intention to observe the demonstration. Her interest in this project has remained consistent since the initial incident." Caroline's subtle shift in attention confirmed Ethan's long-standing suspicion that she had deduced Commander Ward's significance, despite never being officially briefed. The careful dance of information boundaries had evolved over months of collaboration, with Caroline demonstrating remarkable institutional discipline about not asking questions that couldn't be officially answered. The next phase involves selecting 5 regional farms for scaled implementation, Harrington continued, refocusing the conversation on forward planning. Dr. Miller's assessment protocols have identified viable candidates based on both agricultural and security parameters. The discussion proceeded into technical details about technology transfer timelines, training requirements, and monitoring systems. Throughout the conversation, Ethan was struck by how seamlessly they now navigated between classified realities and public narratives, a skill that had developed organically through months of careful collaboration. When Harrington departed 2 hours later, Ethan and Caroline remained at the kitchen table, the formal debriefing transitioning naturally into father-daughter conversation. The evening light streamed through the windows, illuminating the same space where Ethan had once faced seemingly insurmountable financial challenges before Commander Ward's unexpected arrival had changed everything. Commander Ward seems to have a personal interest in Cedar Ridge's success, Caroline observed casually, the statement carefully phrased to respect information boundaries while acknowledging her own perceptions. She appreciates seeing practical applications for advanced technology, Ethan replied with equal care. Military research doesn't always have visible civilian benefits. The exchange exemplified their evolved communication pattern. Caroline, indicating her awareness of deeper realities, while Ethan providing confirmations within permissible boundaries. They had developed this approach over months of collaboration, creating a functional relationship that respected security requirements without requiring explicit falsehoods between father and daughter. Whatever the full backstory, Caroline continued, what we've built here transcends its origins. The agricultural applications we're developing could preserve independent farming across regions where corporate consolidation has seemed inevitable. That impact matters regardless of how the technology initially arrived at Cedar Ridge. The observation encapsulated what had become the core mission driving their work, transforming what had begun as one farm's salvation into a model that could potentially preserve a way of life across rural America. The classified origins of the technology that had initiated this transformation had become almost secondary to the human outcomes it now generated. Later that evening, after Caroline had retired to her room to compile demonstration data, Ethan sat alone on the porch, watching darkness settle over the fields that had nearly slipped from his family's stewardship 18 months earlier. The contrast between his circumstances then and now seemed almost dreamlike in its dramatic transformation. Cedar Ridge Farm had evolved from a struggling operation on the brink of foreclosure to a nationally recognized innovation center that hosted government officials and agricultural scientists. More significantly, it had become a beacon of possibility for other independent farmers facing similar challenges, living proof that technology could serve family agriculture rather than rendering it obsolete. Yet beneath this visible transformation lay the classified reality that had initiated everything, an experimental aircraft crash landing in his north pasture during a summer storm, bringing with it technology and connections that had altered the trajectory not just of Cedar Ridge Farm, but potentially of agricultural practice more broadly. Ethan removed Commander Ward's contact card from his wallet, studying it in the fading light. Though he had never used it, its presence had provided a tangible connection to the extraordinary events that had set everything in motion. Today's brief reunion had reinforced his sense that despite the classified nature of their initial encounter, genuine human connection had formed in those crucial hours when he had simply been a farmer helping an injured stranger. Stars began appearing overhead, the same eternal patterns that had witnessed generations of farmers working this land before modern technology had even been imagined. His grandfather had often spoken of farming as a bridge between past and future, preserving wisdom accumulated through centuries of agricultural practice while remaining open to innovations that could sustain that practice for generations too. Cedar Ridge Farm now embodied that philosophy more completely than Ethan could have imagined possible 18 months ago. The classified technology provided through his encounter with Commander Ward had been integrated with traditional farming knowledge to create something that honored both innovation and heritage, a model that might preserve independent agriculture at a time when many had declared it obsolete. The following morning dawned clear and bright, the first hint of autumn coloring the distant trees that bordered the property. Ethan rose early as always, the farmer's habit of greeting each day at first light unaltered, despite the technological transformations that now supported his agricultural practice. Caroline joined him for coffee, her tablet already displaying analysis of data collected during yesterday's demonstration. The efficiency metrics are impressive even beyond our projections, she reported with scientific satisfaction. The irrigation system's adaptive response to soil conditions is showing water conservation levels that exceed published capabilities of commercial systems by nearly 35%. The practical impact for drought-vulnerable regions could be transformative, Ethan noted, viewing the data through the lens of a farmer who had faced water scarcity throughout his career, especially for smaller operations that can't afford deep wells or extensive reservoir systems. Their discussion continued, focusing on applications that could be scaled for implementation on farms with more limited resources than Cedar Ridge now enjoyed. This had become the central purpose of their collaboration, identifying which advanced technologies could be most meaningfully adapted for broader agricultural use, while respecting the classified origins of core systems. The morning's planning session was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Through the kitchen window, Ethan spotted a familiar black SUV approaching. Not Commander Ward's vehicle from yesterday, but one he recognized from previous official visits. However, the driver was unfamiliar, and the vehicle's approach seemed more urgent than the routine security checks that occurred periodically. A young woman in business casual attire emerged from the SUV, carrying a slim document case with the now familiar insignia of the Agricultural Technology Initiative that served as the public face for classified operations. Her expression conveyed controlled urgency as she approached the house. "Mr. Miller," she greeted Ethan when he met her on the porch. "I'm Lisa Chen, Deputy Operations Coordinator. Director Harrington sent me with priority communications that couldn't be transmitted through standard channels." Inside, after brief introductions to Caroline, Chen placed a secure tablet on the kitchen table. "Director Harrington would like to speak with you directly," she explained, activating the device's encrypted communication system. "The matter requires immediate attention." Harrington's face appeared on the screen, his expression serious but controlled. "Mr. Miller, Dr. Miller, thank you for taking this unscheduled call. A situation has developed that intersects with our agricultural initiative in ways we hadn't anticipated." The careful wording acknowledged Caroline's presence, while maintaining information boundaries. Ethan nodded, instantly alert to the unusual circumstances of this communication. "Commander Ward's current operation has encountered complications," Harrington continued, each word precisely chosen. "She's requested specific technical support that falls within the specialized knowledge developed at Cedar Ridge over the past 18 months. This represents an unexpected reversal of our usual technology transfer direction." Ethan processed the implications immediately. The classified technology that had transformed Cedar Ridge Farm had now evolved in ways that might benefit its original military applications, a development that apparently warranted direct intervention rather than routine reporting channels. "What kind of technical support?" Caroline asked, her scientific focus immediately engaging with the problem, rather than its classified context. "The adaptive soil remediation protocols you've pioneered," Harrington replied, seemingly relieved by her practical response. "Commander Ward is overseeing an operation in a region where environmental conditions have been compromised in ways similar to what you've successfully addressed at Cedar Ridge. The situation has humanitarian implications beyond her primary mission parameters." The explanation was deliberately vague regarding location and specific mission details, yet conveyed enough information to explain the urgency without violating security protocols. Ethan noted Carolyn's expression, focused on the technical challenge, while carefully avoiding questions about classified aspects she wasn't cleared to know. "We can provide the technical specifications for the remediation system," Caroline offered immediately. "The implementation protocols are fully documented in our research database." "The situation requires more direct expertise," Harrington clarified. "Commander Ward has specifically requested Mr. Miller's on-site consultation, given his practical experience implementing these systems under field conditions. The theoretical framework is already available to her team, but the practical application in challenging conditions requires knowledge that isn't fully captured in technical documentation." The request took Ethan by surprise. On-site consultation? Where exactly? "That information would be provided under appropriate security protocols if you agree to assist," Harrington replied carefully. "The location is classified, and transit would occur through military channels with appropriate cover documentation. You would be deployed as an agricultural consultant to what appears to be a humanitarian assistance project, which is partially accurate while obscuring the classified aspects of the operation." Ethan glanced at Caroline, whose expression suggested she understood far more about the situation than she could officially acknowledge. Their months of careful navigation around classified information had created a shared language of subtle signals and unspoken understanding. "How long would this consultation require?" Ethan asked, practical concerns immediately surfacing. "We're approaching harvest preparations here at Cedar Ridge." "Approximately 2 weeks, according to Commander Ward's assessment," Harrington replied. "Dr. Miller would have full operational authority at Cedar Ridge during your absence, with our standard support team maintaining security protocols. All arrangements would be handled through official channels to maintain both operational security and agricultural continuity." The situation presented a mirror image of the events that had initiated everything 18 months earlier. Then Commander Ward had crash-landed on Cedar Ridge Farm, bringing classified technology that transformed Ethan's agricultural operation. Now she was requesting his assistance in applying that transformed technology to her classified operations, a symmetry that felt significant beyond its practical implications. The request wouldn't have been made if alternative options existed, Harrington added, clearly recognizing Ethan's hesitation. Commander Ward emphasized that the environmental remediation component has direct humanitarian impact for local populations beyond the primary mission objectives. That detail shifted Ethan's perspective. Whatever classified operation Commander Ward was conducting, it apparently involved environmental conditions that affected civilian communities, people who might benefit from the agricultural applications developed at Cedar Ridge over the past 18 months. "When would I need to depart?" Ethan asked, his decision forming even as he spoke. A transport would arrive tomorrow morning if you agree, Harrington replied, his expression suggesting both urgency and appreciation. Miss Chen has brought the necessary documentation and operational briefing materials that can be reviewed under appropriate security protocols. Ethan turned to Caroline, their shared glance communicating volumes beyond what could be explicitly stated. "Can you manage harvest preparations without me?" "Absolutely," she replied without hesitation. "The automated systems are fully programmed, and the support team can handle any technical adjustments needed. This sounds like an opportunity to extend our work in ways we hadn't anticipated." The carefully phrased response acknowledged her understanding of the situation's classified nature while expressing support for his participation. Their 18 months of collaboration had created a foundation of trust that transcended the information boundaries between them. "I'll do it," Ethan told Harrington, decision made. "If the environmental remediation systems we've developed here can help elsewhere, that aligns with Cedar Ridge's fundamental mission." Relief crossed Harrington's features. "Thank you, Mr. Miller. Ms. Chen will handle the security briefing and logistical arrangements. Commander Ward will be your primary contact once you reach the operation location." After the communication ended, Chen produced a folder of classified documents requiring Ethan's immediate review and acknowledgement. Caroline tactfully excused herself to handle farm operations, respecting the security protocols without requiring explicit direction to do so. As Ethan reviewed the materials, location details carefully redacted but operational parameters clearly outlined, he reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought him to this moment. 18 months ago, he had been a desperate farmer, facing foreclosure, offering help to an injured pilot out of simple human compassion. Now he was preparing to deploy to a classified location to provide technical expertise developed through that chance encounter's transformative aftermath. The soil remediation system Chen's briefing described involved adapting Cedar Ridge's agricultural techniques to address environmental contamination in a region where local populations depended on compromised land for subsistence farming. Whatever Commander Ward's primary mission entailed, this environmental component represented a direct application of Cedar Ridge's innovations to human needs beyond American borders, an extension of purpose that resonated deeply with Ethan's evolving understanding of his farm's significance. Later that evening, after completing the security briefing and preparing necessary equipment for transport, Ethan joined Caroline on the porch, where they had so often discussed Cedar Ridge's future. The sunset painted the western sky in brilliant hues, remarkably similar to the evening when Commander Ward's aircraft had descended onto the North Pasture, a visual echo that seemed to underscore the cyclical nature of their extraordinary journey. The cover story for my absence is agricultural consultation for an international development project, Ethan explained, sharing what limited information security protocols permitted, which is technically accurate while omitting classified elements. That alignment between cover narrative and actual purpose has been consistent throughout our work, Caroline observed with understated acknowledgement of their shared understanding. The agricultural applications are real and significant, whatever classified frameworks might surround them. The statement epitomized their evolved approach to navigating the intersection of classified and unclassified worlds, focusing on the tangible benefits their work produced while respecting necessary security boundaries. "Cedar Ridge will be in good hands during your absence," Caroline assured him, shifting to practical matters. "The harvest preparation schedules are programmed, and the demonstration program can continue with scheduled visitors. Nothing will be compromised while you're away." Ethan nodded, confident in her management capabilities, yet still processing the unexpected turn his life had taken. 18 months ago, the thought of being specifically requested for a classified international consultation would have seemed utterly implausible. Yet the path from that stormy night to this sunset seemed in retrospect almost inevitable, each step building naturally from choices rooted in fundamental values rather than calculated advantages. As darkness settled over Cedar Ridge Farm, Ethan contemplated the journey ahead. Tomorrow he would board a military transport to a classified location where Commander Ward awaited his expertise for an operation with apparent humanitarian dimensions. The advanced agricultural techniques developed at Cedar Ridge would extend their impact far beyond his property boundaries, potentially benefiting communities facing environmental challenges he could help address. Stars appeared overhead, the same stars visible from wherever Commander Ward currently operated. The same stars his grandfather had observed while working this land decades earlier. Cedar Ridge Farm had always been about more than financial survival or agricultural production. It represented a commitment to stewardship that transcended immediate circumstances. That commitment had led Ethan to help an injured pilot on a stormy night 18 months ago, setting in motion transformations he could never have anticipated. Now it led him beyond his property boundaries to extend Cedar Ridge's innovations where they might serve needs he hadn't previously considered. Another unexpected outcome from a simple act of compassion that continued to generate ripples of positive impact far beyond its origin point. Whatever challenges awaited at his classified destination, Ethan felt prepared to meet them with the same practical wisdom that had guided Cedar Ridge Farm's transformation, integrating advanced technology with generations of agricultural knowledge to serve fundamental human needs, regardless of whether those needs existed in America's heartland or in distant regions where Commander Ward's operations unfolded. The morning would bring a new chapter in Cedar Ridge's extraordinary story, extending its impact in ways that honored both its historical roots and its unexpected evolution into something with significance far beyond what Ethan had ever imagined possible for his family farm. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.